In this mind-blowing episode, Dr. Todd Ovokaitys, creator of Pineal Tones, teaches us how to unlock the dormant potential hidden in our DNA. Dr. Todd is brilliant at blending science and spirituality, so just sit back and prepare to have your reality expanded. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show. And today's guest is Dr. Todd Ovokaitys, or just known as Dr. Todd. And this to date is probably one of my favorite interviews that I have ever done. I just found myself, and Taya too, we found ourselves awestruck so many times talking with Dr. Todd. And he's so real, and he's got a great sense of humor. And I tell you, out of most people that I've ever talked to, Dr. Todd is an absolute avatar in bridging these worlds of science and spirituality. During this episode, he will appeal to your scientific mind, and he will absolutely appeal to your spiritual side. And he has this beautiful way of just juxtaposing these two things. And so, if you're not familiar with Dr. Todd's work, I mean, he's created so many different things. He's got patents on this photoacoustic laser technology that he created that is dramatically increases things like crop yield in agriculture. It enhances the use of stem cell therapy. It can be used for supplements to increase the absorption and assimilation of certain supplements, and it's really brilliant. And outside of that, he's written a book on growing younger, so he's an expert in the fields of anti-aging. And then what I was really curious to talk to him about in this episode was the pineal tones. These pineal tones are specific tones that he developed, that he basically came to in more or less like a meditative state. These things arose and these insights came to him. And they are essentially on how to break down some of the almost blocks that are getting in the way of accessing our full potential of our DNA. Now, one of the things that we've talked about in many different episodes, and that's a theme that's going on right this moment, is this shift in consciousness taking place on the planet. And a lot of this shift in consciousness comes back physically to how things are upgrading and changing in our DNA. And Dr. Todd talks about this in quite a degree, and it's really fascinating because what he developed was he found that these specific tones that you can make, these pineal tones, they literally dissolve some of the blocks that are getting in the way of us accessing that full potential of DNA. And so we get into this in great detail. He shares with us lots of insights that he's got. And again, like I said, he has this very profound way of bridging these science and spirituality gaps. And it's just a fascinating interview. So sit back and enjoy. I want to have Dr. Todd on again at some point with us because I found his information was so valuable. And he's got so many other pieces that I want to talk to him about. Now, a reminder that Dr. Todd is also going to be joining us for a live question and answer after show on Saturday, March 6th at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So join us for that. And after you've watched the episode, if you've got any questions, then go to Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, leave us comments as far as questions that you want to ask Dr. Todd, and then we will compile all of those, and then we'll ask him when we talk to him on the live. Join us for the live, and then you can pose questions while we're watching, and we try to get to as many of those as we can as well. It's a great opportunity to really be able to almost talk to these guests. So when you guys have questions, bring them to us, and then we can pick these people's brains. I mean, the insights that they've got is phenomenal. And the more information that we can get out and spread to other people, when you have a question, I can guarantee you a lot of other people have the same question. So type them in, send them over to us so we can get as much information out there to you guys as possible. All right, I look forward to it and enjoy this episode because this was really mind-blowing for myself. All right, everybody, take care and I'll talk to you soon. I'd also like to give a shout out to our amazing sponsor, EMF Harmonized, for giving 10% off of all of their gear. Go check them out. They are on our website now. You can just go to inspirehealthpodcast.com and click on the link for getting 10% off powerful EMF. This is really important technology that helps to mitigate the damaging frequencies from electromagnetic frequencies you get off of your computer, off of your cell phone, off of your tablet and your router. Everybody should have this type of mitigating technology on their devices. If you are using a device, you should have it. It's really just that simple. No different than why you drink healthy water, why you eat healthy food. It's the same idea. So just click on the link in the show notes or on the YouTube video show notes, or go to Inspire Health Podcast and click on the link. But click on the link and then you'll be sure to get 10% off of your order. They've got bulk orders too, where you can get the mitigating technology for your devices, and you can also get the body patches, which I've talked about too. The body patches are a way to mitigate inflammation in the body using a similar technology. So you can put the patches on different areas of pain, and you will see through thermography scans very specific changes in circulation. Get rid of some of that inflammatory condition and start to cool things down and get some relief for body pains. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. And as we continue on with our series, Science, Mysticism, and Beyond, Humanity's Next Phase of Evolution, today's guest is Dr. Todd Ovokaitys. Dr. Todd was at the top of his class at Northwestern University with the highest possible grade point average, and after 2 years was one of 26 people accepted into an accelerated undergraduate and medical training program at Johns Hopkins University and Medical School. He then completed specialty training in internal medicine and subspecialty training in pulmonary and critical care medicine at Georgetown University Hospital. He was inspired to move to California to understand energy medicine, and shortly after the journey, had a vision of communicating with the pure consciousness of DNA. This has resulted in co-inventing a laser-based interdimensional platform, which has numerous US and international patents granted in the areas of nutraceuticals, agriculture, including cannabis, and especially stem cell biology. He also pursues and provides training in the area of psycho-emotional medicine, getting at the core root of any condition, physical or psychiatric, that can offer lasting relief. These discoveries have the potential to be a part of what may revolutionize and personalize the practice of medicine. He is also the composer and at times conductor of the Lemurian choir that create patterns and tones of information that can accelerate expansion and consciousness. Dr. Todd, what an honor to have you as a guest today.
My honor as well. Great to be with both of you.
Yeah, I was saying to Taya earlier that I was really excited to have you on because I feel like out of most of the people that I've interviewed and that I've followed some of their work, I feel like you do such a brilliant job of really blending the worlds of science and spirituality. And I think it's really beautiful. And in my mind, this is kind of where the progression of medicine is going to move towards. What I'd love to hear about is your journey initially on how you became really interested in bridging these two areas. And if you can tell us a little bit about the vision that you had when you actually communicated with pure consciousness of DNA. That sounds really fascinating.
Right. Well, it goes back, well, how far back do you want to go? But if I tell the whole story, which I could probably tell pretty quickly because it's kind of fun, as I describe it, when I was 5 years old, I was driving my father's Cadillac and looked up at him and said, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a nuclear physicist. And he said, well, what's wrong with being like a fireman? So that's where it all began. And then when I was 8, in the 3rd grade, I fell in love with lasers, which was actually related to the James Bond movie Goldfinger. And then when I was 10, I built my first time machine, which worked and was really fun. And at the age of 13, I fell in love with DNA and realized that if we understood everything about DNA, we could really transcend our biology in many ways. So really, since that time, I combined those interests in quantum physics, magnetics. So the time machine was a magnetic engine that recreated magnetic fields at different geological eras of the Earth. So we're actually transporting seeds back into a different geological time. It actually did alter their germination rates pretty significantly. That was in the 5th grade. And so those elements of biology, altering our epigenetic expression, the study and love of DNA, the use of magnetics, and with lasers, electromagnetics, and different types of wave patterns really has been sort of the guiding theme. And the medical program that I got into, which was fantastic, the one at Johns Hopkins, which for people that have been at that institution, it's really where, in a sense, modern medicine was really formed. There was this amazing person, Sir William Osler, who at the turn of the 20th century, in his lifetime, was recognized as the world's greatest living physician. And Hopkins in that era created the pattern of residency and the way how staff were trained and the basic concepts and the thinking methodology of modern medicine. So it was great to be in that experience with the intention of studying medicine so I could really keep open all the avenues that I might be able to explore DNA and its understanding, how it works and how it could be usefully, um, usefully, how you say, tuned in a sense. The big change that led to where I am now and even the vision was in my pulmonary training, where I was doing lots of bronchoscopies, invasive procedures on persons with AIDS and pneumonia. What people don't really understand if they're not in that field is that unlike a normal person who gets pneumonia, it's usually caused by one thing, like pneumococcal pneumonia or H flu pneumonia or any other type of pneumonia. It's usually just a particular organism. Whereas with HIV, it can be 5 different things. It can be one or more bacteria, one or more viruses. It can be one or more types of malignancy, and it can all be rolled into one. So you wind up having to do invasive procedures to test for a wide spectrum of things to make sure you're covering everything because it's such a serious and often deadly condition. Well, I was in the midst of late nights in the ICUs. I just had this inspiration, and it gets back to the very basic elements of physics. There is a concept called the natural frequency. And simply that means that every structure in the universe, whether it's a simple molecule with 2 atoms that are bonded together, or a larger structure like a tuning fork, or a bigger structure like a skyscraper, or an expansion bridge that stretches across 2 points of land, that everything has what's called the natural frequency, which is the frequency at which that system will vibrate when you stimulate it, when you give it a good shake. What is the basic frequency that will stimulate the whole system? And the concept of resonance is that even a very small input at that natural frequency will tend to build energy in the system. The energy grows and grows until you hit a point where the energy in equals the energy out, and you hit a peak energetic level, or sometimes that overwhelms the system and it will cause it to break down. You might have seen that incredible footage of, I believe it was the Verrazano Straits Bridge, and there were gusts of wind that just happened to match the natural frequency, and you literally saw the bridge having wider and wider undulations, and the cars that were on it, got off as quickly as they could until the whole thing eventually just collapsed. And while I was bleary-eyed and over-caffeinated during ICU nights, I had this inspiration that just like any other structure, and HIV is, of course, in the very small scale of molecules, that there was something different structurally or geometrically in the genetic material of HIV that was different from the way human DNA is structured. That was just an intuition. It wasn't even known yet. Eventually, it was proven that there are regions called stem loops that have a different structure. Instead of a double-stranded DNA, it's actually RNA. Instead of a double-stranded nucleic acid, there are parts where it spins out and they're bare loops. And that became a differential point that was possible to literally shake that region along with a particular protein called the zinc finger protein. That gets into the work that was ultimately done. So it's just that vision that we would find a vibrational differential, something vibrating differently in the virus versus the human system, that we could literally tune to that differential frequency and literally inactivate the virus without any need for drugs. Because the drugs are all working at a very basic molecular biological level, deep in the control mechanisms and expression systems of DNA, and by nature would tend to be toxic. And even though people are living longer with that infection, the drugs still tend to have a lot of toxicities and, of course, significant expense. So that was the idea, the vision, the inspiration. And based on that inspiration, 3 months before I finished all of my medical training, I attended this really cool course in Southern California which was sponsored by what ultimately was known as the Whole Brain Learning Institute. And it was about the use of sound and sound pattern to enhance the immune system, but also for so-called accelerated learning techniques or whole brain learning techniques. And at that event, I met a very smart left brain woman who had some physical issues, some physical accidents, and found the Feldenkrais system to repair and regenerate herself, and who also then became a medical intuitive and clairvoyant. And that inspired me to leave the East Coast, where I did all my training, and move to the West Coast to really learn energy medicine and also medical intuition. And during one of her classes, where we activated Kundalini energy first, that was the first step, was to activate the so-called serpent energy that, as they say, is coiled at the base of the spine. And in the system of energy in India, the Sanskrit system, they describe two channels of energy, Ida and Pingala, going up the spine. Ida is the left hand, Pingala is the right hand. But when those are activated in balance, that then precipitates the function of a central channel called Sushumna, and energy rises from the base of the spine up through the whole energy system, the chakra system, to the crown, and, and lights up the quote unquote 1,000-petaled lotus of the crown. And so that's where the process started. And the exercise was not just to activate and raise Kundalini from the base of the spine to the crown, but then to actually experiment with running different quote unquote colors of Kundalini. So literally doing the whole spectrum. And we did this as an exercise with a twin. And it's not typical that you're doing a meditation, you have someone there, literally a scribe, to record your experience. So that was kind of the setup. And so we went through the colors from the red to the orange and on and up until we hit the violet. And I gave this descriptions of what the experience was at those different frequencies. When we hit the violet, it was like the movie Contact with Jodie Foster. You recall that machine that was spinning on different axes, and she went through the wormhole, yeah, and came out through a portal into a different kind of dimension where she saw a being. Well, I had an experience like that. It was went through the portal. And where I emerged, I saw a doorway, and there are these guardians of the gate, these 8-foot tall Alibaba guys with big curved swords. And they said, the information in this domain is very sacred, and you have permission to go through the door, but realize that there is a big responsibility that goes with it. And there are those that didn't respect the information, and they were destroyed. And it was very Game of Thrones, like they literally just showed people being decapitated and heads flying and the whole thing. So the point was made. And when I went through the doorway, I came into this giant room, and you can imagine the DNA coiled in the nucleus of a cell. And if you expanded it, magnified it many times, so it'd fill a whole room, that's what it looked like. And it's kind of like Dr. Eric Pearl, who talks about seeing a giant eye that talked to him, even though it didn't have a mouth. Same thing, the DNA talked even though it didn't have a clearly visible mouth. So some sort of telepathic communication or direct transfer. And the information was that the understanding of science about DNA is correct, but incomplete. It is true that DNA is a library that contains a massive amount of data, truly an encyclopedia of how to build all the protein structures that make life possible. And the part that science doesn't know, where it is incomplete, is that DNA is also electromagnetic. And conceptually, first for understanding, DNA is not just a simple double helix. When you go deeper into the structure, for basically 6 feet or 2 meters of DNA length to fit into a nucleus that is 1 micron, or basically 1 millionth of a meter wide, it's supercoils. So the DNA strand is the first level, but that forms another coil. And then that bigger coil forms a supercoil around that, and around that, up to 7 levels of supercoiling. And that these supercoils are in a medium that has moving charges. So you have coils and coils within coils and moving charges, which is creating an electromagnetic system. Fundamentally, it's a type of sophisticated metaphor, in fact, even more metaphoric, it's kind of like on a small scale, a type of radio that's literally transmitting and receiving information. And the core message, the deepest message of the whole experience was that if you understand the frequency patterns that DNA is transmitting, then you will be able to learn how to instruct through electromagnetic signatures a sick cell to become healthy or an old cell to become young. And that was the basis of developing the interdimensional laser technology that would be able to use that principle, would be able to create a type of sophisticated vibrational signature that could target particular parts of DNA or particular parts of protein structure and literally instruct a type of energetic or conformation change that could either repair a health issue or rejuvenate and regenerate DNA and create more youthfulness.
That's
Fascinating.
really fascinating. And one of the things that comes to mind, and I'd like to get your feedback on this, is when we've talked to a number of other people, one of the themes that keeps coming up is that our DNA is literally going through a time of transformation right now, that there's an upgrading and an activation that's going on. People use the terms that there are light codes that we are being exposed to that are basically unlocking this other access or this potential of what our DNA is capable of. And with that, opens up this other information and unlocks things like our innate healing capacity to a much larger capacity than what we currently are able to access. So from your perspective, when we hear things like when people are talking about that and they're talking about light codes, I mean, how I interpret that is this would be like, some of the different people that we spoke to that have channeled this information. And when I think of light codes, I think of that as a frequency or a vibration that we are being exposed to on some level that is unlocking information that's innate within ourselves. And how it sounds like is it's basically within DNA. How does that make sense from the way you're describing things?
When you get into deep physics, it gets quite interesting. At the most fundamental level, anything in our physical universe can be described as a combination of waves and wave functions. So if you combine the concepts of waves and their frequencies and modulations and their amplitudes and their geometry, you have a recipe for describing pretty much everything in the physical universe. And some would say that physical matter, in essence, is light slowed down. And any type of subatomic particle can typically be defined as a type of photon that expresses itself literally as a type of particle as opposed to a wave through the process of observation. And what differentiates one from another more than anything is literally the amount of energy that it takes to create a particle of that type. So everything vibrates if we're talking about physical structure. So all of the biochemistry in the body, if it is an organic molecule with carbon bonded to anything, every bond vibrates in a particular way. And there are many levels of frequency domains. So even at the physical 3D level, 4D, if you include time, that you can determine in various ways what I would call the vibrational modes of things. And we, for example, use that in our work with HIV. So that was the original vision, to find a vibrational way to inactivate the virus. Well, we had to create a particular type of waveform, which is where you take a beam of laser light, and instead of the waves being all in phase, we have an optical invention, which is really the core discovery that allowed us to do everything we've done since, the ability literally to repattern matter in its vibrational modes. Is every part of the system has a vibration. So every single molecular bond, and this is a process called quantum chemistry, you can calculate what the frequency is. And every atom has an atomic mass. So you can look at any molecule as a mechanical analog of weights and springs. And the atomic mass parallels the mass of a spring, and the bond strength, which you can calculate through quantum methods, is essentially like the spring constant in a weight and spring system. And then there are different bond angles, which create different vectors of the vibrational movement. And using more complex mathematics called iterative calculations, where you get an estimate and then further refine it, which we did in our earlier work with supercomputers at the University of Edinburgh, that you can define for, say, an amino acid, what its vibrational frequency is, and how many cycles you need to stimulate it to get it to full resonance. And so you can do it for a particular bond, you can do it for a building block like an amino acid or a nucleic acid, and then you can do it for strings of amino acids or whole loops or even overall protein structures. So there are multiple levels of frequency that can be determined. And what we created was also a delivery system to take those frequencies much deeper through tissue than ordinary laser could go. So ultimately, everything reverts to an understanding of the way things vibrate, how to tune the frequencies of things, and how doing that tuning alters the energy structure and function of that system, and then defining what is the intention of it. What useful process would you like to achieve, and based on that, we have particularly made contributions in the area of stem cell science, which is very, very interesting. And at a more basic level, we've shown we can alter the crystalline shape of nutritional or pharmaceutical compound, which may make it work a lot more effectively. We've shown that we can take a nutritional solution for plants, and in a form that's already good, that might increase yields by 20%. Just by adding this energy and information, the yields will increase by 60%. So we can triple the relative increase in yields. And further, we can increase by factors of as much as 2 to 5-fold the actual nutrient density that the plant will hold, or the nutrition of actually eating that produce when it's harvested. So anything that is molecular vibrates, and fundamentally we can tune the system to almost anything.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When I was reading through your book, Growing Younger, reducing the biomarkers for aging, it's I mean, the work that you've done both in medicine and in agriculture seems almost unbelievable when you start to read it, like how much of an impact you can have on the nutrient absorption or of like of the plant itself just by using this laser technology on it. It seems astounding, but I feel like this is part of where things keep transitioning to. I feel like for a long time we've kind of focused so much on almost the biochemistry, and now it sort of seems like that's still important. It's a part of things, but it seems like things are moving more and more to looking at frequency and vibration and magnetics, and this sort of aspect of things is becoming sort of the next focus, it seems like, in medicine.
Right. And even things such as, how does a receptor find the ligand that binds to it? So a conventional chemical concept would be, well, there are these molecules bouncing around in solution, and they slowly through diffusion make their way to the receptor. And even in conventional sciences now, there's a concept that there really is a vibrational mechanism. There's a tuning, that the vibrational pattern of what the receptor binds is basically tuning to the particular molecule that's going to bind to it. And they find each other much more efficiently because they're actually doing vibrational tuning, not just random bouncing around through diffusion to get there.
Which really makes sense if we think about it, that the body probably is that intelligent that it would have all sorts of different mechanisms to make that much more viable than just this random sort of act going on at each synapse. So
Right, exactly. And I believe your question was a bit more esoteric than the answer that I gave. I think your question was more, well, what about the mysteries that are locked deeper within our DNA? What about the potential to achieve the abilities of the yogis like they describe in Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East, where a group of roughly a dozen scientists went to India just because they wanted to prove that the medicine men were just magicians, they were magic tricks, they were fooling people, just trying to get their money, whatever. And while there are fakirs that are fakers, I'm sure, like in anything, there's the real ones, and then the ones that are just doing it for getting personal gain out of it, that they found authentic masters. And they described that a master could disappear and show up 1,000 miles away, and they would like mark date and time, and just a few minutes later some would reappear 1,000 miles away. And they documented by location that they would sit down at a table and the master would like wave his hands and food would appear. That they could walk through fire, that they could love, they could do all these things that I believe it's part of popular culture that we all are fascinated by and are attracted to this concept that there's more to us than meets the eye. With their various Marvel adventure movies and DC comic movies and so forth, where they take these almost caricatures, but create uh, movie characters that maybe have more depth than was ever in the comic books. And I think we have a fascination with these abilities. And in part we say, well, it's Hollywood, it's special effects. But I think at a deep level, we realize there's more to us than meets the eye. We have a lot more potential than we think. And even though it's in there, like, how do we get to it? What's the mechanism? How do you literally find the combination of the safe? And whether it's a simple linear set of numbers or if it's like a multi-dimensional lock in a many layered key, which I think is really more of the reality, like how do you get to it? And that's the deeper level of information. That's where we get into the esoteric side of the discussion, that is probably where you're most interested. And probably the weirdest part of it, and the part that we can't prove yet because our equipment really is four-dimensional, right? We have physical microscopes and spectroscopic equipment that allows us to measure things in the type of reality that we perceive, which is fundamentally a four-dimensional reality. We perceive length, width, and height, and if it persists through time, that's considered the fourth dimension. And we have to work kind of hard and see special images to even get an idea of what a fifth dimensional object is like. So you may have seen some of the animations of a so-called tesseract, for example, which is a hypercube, and you can actually see the inside becoming the outside and the outside becoming inside, and it rolls in and out, which gives a feel and flavor for it. That was one of the concepts in that book that was really great, and movie that was pretty well done, called A Wrinkle in Time.
Right.
I talk about a tesseract where the two ends of the tesseract may look distant, but they can also overlap and be at the same point. So you can literally cross massive distances of space if it's a five-dimensional space, and you find aligning points of the tesseract, and the infold and outfold like allows you to go from point A to point B across a type of interdimensional wormhole. So the concept of higher dimensions is a bit of a stretch for us to visualize because we're really not trained that way. And we can get a feel for it with some of the animations for, say, a Klein bottle or a tesseract, where the animations are useful just to get a feel, even going from 3 and 4 dimensions to 5 dimensions. And that said, even our physics is saying that we exist in a multidimensional space. And the latest evolution in quantum physics, the mechanics, is called superstrings theory. And there's a desire that started with Einstein and that era to get to a theory of everything, which is a singular mathematical construct where you could combine all the forces of nature into one equation and understand everything and how it interacts, and literally understand in a way the whole history of the universe and everything that can happen by virtue of one equation that unites it all. And the mathematical construct where this works is many dimensional. The simplest one has 12 dimensions. The next more complex has 26 dimensions, and the probably higher dimensional spaces where it can work as well. So that is saying that even though we perceive fundamentally in space 3 dimensions, that the actual true nature of the universe is much deeper than that. And it's in these deeper dimensions that colleagues of mine, like Lee Carroll, who is the author of the Cryon writings, talks about the reality is multidimensional and our DNA is multidimensional. And if we're going to harvest, like dig into, how is it that we can really aspire to and begin to unfold these higher potentials, how we can be more than just, as they said in Fifth Element, the human meat stick or a meat popsicle if we get frozen, and aspire to these abilities that we hear about certain masters, historic and at present. I mean, if anybody can achieve it, if anyone has ever achieved it, then in theory, it could be possible for anyone to achieve it. And when we see movies that are representations of superpowers, whether it's Heroes or the Avengers or X-Men, I think there's a part of it that says, ooh, what if I could do that? I mean, what if that's in there? And if so, how do I awaken it? That when we get to this higher dimensional space, and Cryon describes this as enfolded interdimensional layers of DNA, that there are processes that we can do to unblock it, to release it, to unfold it, and to have much more access to all of what we are than we ordinarily do.
Yeah, it's even when you mention about watching superhero movies, sometimes I think, like, I remember watching Star Trek growing up with my dad, and a lot of that, like, it sort of leaves a space in your brain, in your mind, to be able to even think of these other possibilities around stuff. You know,
Mm-hmm.
even like the Avengers movies, for example. I mean, they talk about the Tesseract, and they kind of
Right.
bring that into it. So sometimes it's like, to watch some of those things occasionally, because a lot of these things build off of concepts that I think are there in cutting edge and things in science and quantum physics, and they kind of bring them into a movie version of it, which sometimes just makes it fun to expand your realm of what you think is possible.
Right. Absolutely. And I believe that the creators are inspired to those presentations because that's what's coming up in like the global psyche,
Mm-hmm.
that it starts percolating to the surface and there's a interest in it, and we get a little bit of a taste of it, and we see it, and it starts resonating sort of at a deeper level of understanding. And Star Trek was one of the early representations. I was a fan of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And even presentations that were incredibly crude from the standpoint of special effects, like the Twilight Zone episodes. They were rudimentary in terms of what we saw on the screen and the effects, but they were profound when it came to the psychological impact and the concepts that they were presenting.
Yeah.
And that's just expanding. We see more and more interest in it, because I think we're at a level that we're about ready to move to that new realm. And there's a hack. I mean, this is also that we're into hacks, right? There's the neuro
Shortcut
hack.
episode. Yeah.
What's that, right? Because it's
Some
all
kind of
the
an easier shortcut.
right. There's biohacks, neurohacks. Well, one of the things that is on the list for us to talk about is the pineal tones, which is, it's basically, you could call it a DNA vibrational consciousness hack.
I like that. So that was where I wanted to move into next was, how did the pineal tones start? So maybe before we get into even pineal tones,
Mhm.
for people that aren't too familiar, can you talk a little bit about the pineal gland, both in its regard to overall health and also its association with spirituality and how those things kind of intermix?
Mhm. Sure. The pineal gland is located roughly in the center of the head. So if you drew a line down from the crown, it's actually not exactly the top, it's slightly posterior to it, but for ease of discussion, it's roughly the very top of the head. And if you drew that straight down, and then drew a line straight back from the so-called third eye, where those lines cross is roughly where the pineal gland resides. And functionally, the pineal gland is an organ of light reception and integration. And anatomically, the optic nerves from the eyes translate through a part of the brain, particularly the middle brain called the mesencephalon, which connects to the pineal gland, and from thence, of course, the occipital cortex for a sense of vision. And the pathways from the optic nerves to the pineal gland are basically giving us constant information about light versus darkness. And before we had artificial lights, the natural light was sunrise, sunset. How long is each day? And many organisms, and this is especially true in reproductive biology, that the length of day and the days getting longer, particularly in springtime, is translated through the pineal. That creates tremendous hormonal changes in the organism. So uh, as the day is getting longer, for example, in birds, there's the enhancement of gonadal function, size, readiness, in both sexes, and it's preparatory. So the overall theme of the pineal gland is it's literally monitoring the light versus darkness and the timing of light and darkness in our environment. Its major output is melatonin. I think that's pretty well known now. And melatonin is a profound hormone that has many related health benefits. It assists us in sleep, that's part of it, but it's also an antioxidant hormone, anti-tumor hormone. And the cycling of melatonin and the patterning in the pineal gland is about timing cycles. So you've probably heard of something called circadian rhythms. It simply means literally the rhythms of the clock. So if you look at our daily hormone production, for example, cortisol from the adrenal glands, um, it it has a cycle where we can predict at a particular time of day, like after we sleep, we wake up and it's at a certain level, and it alters to a certain degree in the mid-afternoon, and then it goes to a certain level at night. And there's a normal pattern for that. It's a daily cycle. And when we look at adrenal function, we actually will check the adrenal hormone levels at multiple times during the day. Usually, if we're being more precise, we'll check it at 4 points during the day and look, well, is it a normal cycle? Is it depressed? Is it overdriven? And what time and parts of the day is it overdriven? Because there's a natural cycle. And other hormones, growth hormone, uh, androgenic and estrogenic hormones go through a daily cycle, a daily rhythm. And it's the pineal that's driving the daily cycle and the daily rhythm. And then there's longer patterns. The light and dark cycling sets the rhythm of puberty, when that happens, how it happens. Uh, with women, it's more apparent, of course, with the menstrual cycle, and it's setting what is the pattern in that cycle. When does it begin? When does it conclude? And how long is it? And so the daily cycles and the longer biological cycles are being governed by the pineal gland, and its healthy state is measured by melatonin levels. That's the physical side. From the esoteric side, the pineal gland associates with the highest of the conventional chakras, the crown chakra. And it's felt to be the organ of enlightenment, which is, it's all about light when you get right down to it. And when there is the full conscious evolution that rises through the awareness and balance of all of the centers and the rising Kundalini that activates the pineal gland, it's described as the opening of the 1,000-petaled lotus, which is like moving into a much higher state of consciousness, um, higher awareness, perception, unity consciousness, a state of abiding bliss, while also being hyper aware and having vast amounts of knowledge beyond what you ever studied in books. And if you go back even to ancient writings and ancient pictography, images, the Sumerians, revered the structure. You see a lot of pine cone structures in ancient art, and that's referring to the pineal because it looks, I feel like a little pine cone.
Yeah.
From the esoteric standpoint, there are whole systems of healing based on a concept called a master cell in the pineal gland. And now this, of course, is not scientifically proven, and I'll make the distinction. There are things that I'll say that are scientific, and by scientific I mean that there are objective three-dimensional technologies for showing that something exists, and to show that qualitatively and even quantitatively. And then there is a leap into the realm of the esoteric, where we basically have to take it on faith that someone who has, how you say, a wider perception or expanded consciousness can have an observation or perception or description, and then we have to use our own filter and say, do we think that's true or not? And we get into that realm with this idea of the master cell of the pineal. And there are whole systems of healing based on this concept that within the pineal gland, if we evolve or enhance or liberate or unfold new layers of knowledge or capacity within that master cell, it instantaneously translates that to all the other cells of the body.
Mm-hmm.
So the pineal tones are a concept, not necessarily specifically the master cell, but potentially that, and the gland as a whole, is a way of releasing that which blocks the full expression and knowledge and wisdom and potential within the DNA.
So how did you then come to learn about the pineal tones? I mean, I think all of that sounds amazing, and that's very much in line with a lot of the stuff that we've studied and looked at and worked with. And I love the blend of it too. I like it when you can explain things from a very physical base, and then there's also room for stuff that can't quite be proven yet in the way that we like to see proof of it right at the moment, but it's experiential. So much of this stuff is you have different experiences, and then that's ultimately what allows you to decide what resonates and what doesn't resonate and what you want to be open to learning more about or not. And some of this stuff I think is you kind of have to have certain experiences with it to then decide if you want to explore it more or not.
Right.
But how did you then arrive at the pineal tones? How did you come to, and how did you know which tones to use, and how does that work?
Well, you act like it was a science project and was all done intentionally. Or at least that's the way the question is posed.
So let's hear the story.
So maybe when you, going back to when you were 12 years old, that was your next project.
It came after making the time machine.
Amazing.
Well, it all began there, and it is the logical progression based on the passion that I've always had since those earliest times. It's like I was born to combine the concepts of DNA, magnetics, and lasers, fundamentally. That's where my triggers were, my aha points. And this story is really in line with our idea of unfolding our full potential, particularly as defined by what's hidden in DNA, what's there awaiting the epigenetic switches to be flipped that allows us to, how you say, flip on the master switches. And it could be mastery of one thing or another. I think they all have their encoding, as it were. And one person might become telepathic first, another person may be a medical intuitive first, another person may learn how to remote view first. There are different constructs, I believe, in the system, and people will naturally, just like any other ability, develop one over another. But I think the wide range of abilities is the potential for almost anyone. It's a matter of cultivation. And the key, what launched the Pineal Tones, had nothing to do with being admonished to sing at all. Everything was revealed like aha moment by aha moment. And like many of the great things that have happened, especially esoterically and even to a degree scientifically, are related to my friendship with the author Lee Carroll, who I think you'll have on the show if you haven't already. And he's a best-selling author of many books. And in this realm of information that a person brings through them that is for the benefit of the many, I really love his information. It's really pure. And one of the types of events that I've had the pleasure and privilege of creating are what I call life extension seminars, where it's typically a 2-day weekend where I provide people with the information, what we know scientifically and what we believe esoterically will allow you to turn back the aging clock and live a lot longer in a higher functioning, more youthful physical vehicle of increasing potential. And for the finale of one of the events that was hosted locally in San Diego, Lee Carroll joined to do a cryon presentation, bringing through the energy of, those of you who know it, it's obvious, but those who haven't heard the name, cryon defines himself as a magnetic master from the central sun or source energy and information, whose presence here is about realigning the magnetic grids of the earth. And cryon's been around for about 20 years and described that the magnetic grids of the earth would change, that magnetic north would shift, that the frequency of the fundamental resonance would shift, and that the amplitude would shift. And these magnetic changes were about creating a magnetic couch for humanity as a whole to hold a higher level of consciousness. That's his purpose. And the message that day, and it was at a time called the Harmonic Concordance, which, as I recall, was 2004. It might have been 1111, which is one of the big esoteric nodes, 1111 days, which is why we're doing an explicar on 2/22/22, because we like those so-called master number resonances. And the parable is this: a man wakes up one day and opens his front door, and then there's this massive block of granite covering his entire yard. And it was so huge that there was no physical device that could possibly remove it. And he's just perplexed, like, how do I get to my driveway? How do I go to work? And he ponders a while and gets inspired to hire a sculptor. And then the sculptor creates the most magnificent piece of art the world had ever seen. The discussion went on to give the interpretation, which is that our DNA is like the block of granite, and that within our DNA is the most beautiful work of art the world has ever seen. However, it's blocked. And then this is the only time or place I've ever heard this information. And again, this is esoteric. There's no way to prove this. You just have to go into your internal filter and say, does this feel right or not right to me? What was described, and I say he in the generic sense, crying could be he, she, or it, but we generally use the he to refer to either gender or both, or maybe even neither these days, that we have all of this unlimited mastery potential. It's already in our DNA. We just have to reveal it. And our revealing it is blocked by what he described by an 8-dimensional filter. So if we define a 12-dimensional reality, which is compatible with superstrings theory, he's saying that 8 of those dimensions is blocked by an 8-dimensional filter, so that most people only have 4 dimensions even available to perceive. So humanity, while it has vast potential, is literally confined largely to a 4-dimensional construct and 4-dimensional perception and 4-dimensional reality. And that all we need to do that the method of revealing the information, of unfolding these abilities, of going into our soul records, of recovering the mastery we've already achieved, is by literally, just like the sculptor, peeling off the layers of the 8-dimensional filter that's blocking those higher dimensional possibilities, realities, understandings, and capacities. So if you heard that information, what would your logical question be?
How do we
How
do
do you
it?
start to chip away the layers?
Exactly. Exactly. Like, okay, well, I got this filter, don't want it. How do you remove it? And that led me to a Saturday of meditation where I'd say with inner vision, I went into a perception of the filter to like actually see it with my own inner vision as well as I could perceive it. And when I saw the construct, I then spontaneously began to make tones. And just like that suspension bridge that had higher and higher waves of resonance until it collapsed, I was creating tones in a way that the energy was building and building and building in the structure, which looked like a toroid, which of course is a key geometric structure of the universe, whether it's sacred geometry or physical geometry. And at a certain point, the substance of the filter transmuted into energy that then activated long dormant DNA strands. And that became the first level of the pineal tones. And it came with an affirmation that, and it was actually given in all 3 persons, first, second, and third person. And for simplicity and time, I'll just say the first person. So the affirmation or the remembrance was that I, as a being, am eternally pure and perfect. And anything that appears to be other than perfection is merely the illusion of this experiment of our experience. So the first level of pineal tones is literally about remembering your divine eternal perfection. And it's just uncovering it layer by layer, step by step. And it didn't have a particular name then. It just had literally one level, one set of vibrations and tonal patterns. And gradually, usually spaced a few months at a time, I would get the next one and the next one and the next one. And at a certain point, it had evolved. There were 8 levels. And so I began sharing those in our programs. And at the point that there were 8, we did an event in Moscow, and it was really pretty amazing. On 1 week's notice, we gathered an event with 300 people in a room to do the Pineal Tones. We only had 4 hours in an evening, so what I would teach in a whole weekend, I did in a very condensed 4-hour space of time. And at the end, the Carol came to do another channel, and then he said, what you have done is you have gone into your Akashic records, your soul records, and remembered the tones you used when you were in ancient Lemuria. And even though you were the architect of the temples of rejuvenation and had full access to that technology, you remained young for a very long time, for so long that people celebrated that longevity by using the tones you just shared this evening. And by being here this evening, all of you will live longer lives. And if you use these tones regularly, you'll live even longer. And by having done this evening, you've created a permanent portal in the city of Moscow that will forever raise the vibration of the city. And that was the first acknowledgement of what the tones were, where they came from, and what they did. And the further description with respect to removing the filter was that the part that you hear is only the smallest part of what's happening. And you're creating very high frequency overtones and harmonics. And it's like there's this incredible symphony in the room next door. But all you hear in this room is the buzz of the snare drum, which is the physical part that we hear, yet that's carrying the information of the full symphony. And the interdimensional parts literally wrap around the interdimensional aspects of DNA, and it transmutes the filter into the activation of the parts that have been dormant and asleep.
I think that sounds beautiful, Dr.
That's
Todd.
really beautiful.
And we're coming to 0222.
Dr. Todd, I have a question for you. So it was probably about with the birth of our last baby. She's 3.5 years old now. I felt like.
Was she the one in the unicorn dress?
Yes.
That was the one you
That
met.
was John. Yeah.
Came to show you her new unicorn dress.
Yeah. I felt like I was no longer wanting to I wasn't inclined to read books anymore. And the books that I was leaning towards were no longer, well, I should rephrase that. I was no longer wanting to read the typical books that I gravitated towards, and instead started to read and become much more interested in books that had been written by channelers. So I went back and I was reading in any spare time that I had Seth material.
Mm-hmm.
I started to read Barbara Marciniak, her material.
Sure. Yeah,
And
I know the work.
what was really interesting is when you speak of sound and sound techniques, that came up quite frequently, because in these books, they spoke about ancient civilizations were actually they weren't less evolved than us. A lot of them were actually much more evolved than us. And it's due to their ability to use sound and sound techniques within the civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And even fast forward now to our recent interactions with a light shaman, Lemurian shaman by the name of Huna Flash. He goes by Huna Flash. He's featured in the series as well. when we did the seal ceremony with him and we spoke with him at length, he spoke of the importance of sound and language and how we need to, at this time specifically, as there are these major shifts happening in our world and consequently the universe, we need to step away from the language of Gregorians. So we need to pay more attention to how we use language and what sort of sounds we put out there, because that will actually impact our reality to a degree that we can't fully fathom at this time. And even for the seal ceremony that we did with him, Jason and I were renamed, and these sounds, these syllables and sounds that he offered us as our name. So I'm Pakarema and you're
Wakamaro.
These are codes essentially to tap into and awaken these light codes. And it made me think of that as you were describing, even activating this.
Well, using specific tones to
Awaken.
almost dissolve some of the blocks of the DNA.
Right.
It's just neat when you start to hear overlap between different things. To me, that always helps, even in the esoteric sort of truths when you're trying to wade through them. When you start to see overlap and synchronicities within different systems, I always find that sits really well with me too. So
it's validating. It feels validating. So that's really fascinating what you just spoke of.
Right. When different lenses start showing you a similar picture just from a different angle, and together it makes an even more complete picture, it just feels more real and more complete.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. A question I've got around pineal is if there's any truth to this and anything that you've come across, but is there anything that you have been aware of that can sort of sedate the ability for the pineal to function optimally? I know I've heard things like that it can accumulate fluoride around the area and some different things like that. Is there anything that you're aware of that almost like physically, or not even just physically, but mentally, emotionally, that can impact our ability to utilize the pineal in those ways?
Or even this 8th dimensional filter that you spoke of. What is that exactly and why is it there?
Yeah, that was the other question that came out in my mind when you're like, first one was like, well, how do we get rid of those filters? And then it's like, why is that filter there to begin with?
Not sure how it got there. Actually, that part of the story was not revealed. I mean, we could get into all manner of theories around that. And to me, it's not so much that we have a limitation and how it got there, but more how we become unburdened of it. I mean, and maybe it's there for a reason. Maybe we weren't ready for a whole civilization to have, you know, our full measure of abilities. Maybe something that we do need to unfold gradually. We do need to slowly have a more humane world and a more enlightened civilization before we're ready to have those types of abilities. Maybe we did it ourselves because we knew we really weren't ready for it, and it was kind of a safety valve that only if someone evolves to the point that they can actually clear this structure and have those abilities, that undergoing that process type of cleansing and purification so it can be used safely and wisely. So.
Yeah, that's really, you know, that even reminds me of watching Star Trek before, where it wasn't until civilizations reached a certain level of consciousness on the planet and technology and whatnot to a certain level that then they could actually expand and be a part of like a larger federation of planets and everything. So it is kind of interesting to think about it like that. They're all fun kind of conversations.
That might be us right now.
Me?
Yeah, that might be us, our civilization right now.
Well, that's gone through my head a lot this last time. I'm like, man, are we right at that edge where it's like we're ready to make that next shift? We've kind of hit a certain level that now we can see what's the next phase is. So it's part of what's really exciting about right at the moment.
Well, I can actually comment on that if you want.
For sure.
In terms of the process with the pineal tones. And this really is the significance of the next event, which is called the Aloha Choir, because Aloha is hello and goodbye. It will be the last choir of this type of choirs that we've done. It'll move into something new. We're not sure what that will be. So it's Aloha So goodbye to the past and what we've done before, and hello to what will be new. And the next part of the story, so you asked, well, how did it evolve? It wasn't like, oh, I think I'll do pineal tones someday, and this is how it works. It's like, it came like one little element, one little piece, one little discovery after another to we have the understanding we do now, or at least the story as we know it right now. Fast forward to 2010, and again, it was an event in San Diego, a life extension event, where we had more knowledge. We learned more. We weren't quite into our clinical work with stem cells yet, but we'd learned a lot more about metabolism and the things that you can do nutritionally, metabolically, and lifestyle-wise to turn back the aging clock. And we had the pineal tones as well. And at that point, uh, we'd gone from 8 to 16, and there's an 8 theme that goes with this as well. So uh, over these 2 days, I was sharing all 16 of the levels we had at that point. Each level has its own intention, its own purpose, its own vibrational theme. And we have an artist who creates gorgeous art that goes with each level as well, that captures the vibrational and dimensional flavor of each. So this whole system was evolving. And I always did them one at a time. And the new information, and this is what we were talking about before we started, was that I actually got an assignment, which was a little bit daunting. And I had a laborious name that I was given, and I usually don't emphasize that, but you gave yours, so I guess I can give mine.
Why not?
Which a client said was Yae, which is Yawee. So I was like, Yae, I have an assignment for you. And in the time I'd known Lee Carolyn and had heard crying chants, I'd heard dozens by that point. I'd never gotten an assignment. So I was like, uh-oh. And I'll tell you what it is and where it is and when it is. And you don't have to do it. But I know you will. And he took us to an auditorium, he said 26,000 years before, where there were 800 singers, and there were 400 choristers on one side and 400 on another. And he said, it's great that you've got 16 levels, but it's not complete. There are 8 more. And the way they're really done to have the full power is that they're not sung singly, they're sung in pairs. And that creates the full interdimensional impact of them. And he then described an event where there were also 8 more. So that the 8s keep coming up. So after the 8th level, I learned that they came from ancient Lemuria. After 8 more, it's like, well, they're actually done in pairs. And then there's 8 more to complete the system that was done in the ancient times. And I would like you to recreate for the first time in 26,000 years, which, as you know, is the galactic cycle, the time it takes for the Earth to precess around the galactic center, which is big in the Mayan calendar as well. And at that time, you gathered 800 singers, 400 each side, and you sang them in pairs. So the assignment is to remember the 8 you don't have yet, and remember how to pair them, and remember how to order them. And on December 21st, 2012, gather at least 400 singers on the island of Maui, where it was done the last time. Okay. So that was the deal. And we did that. And it was like an immense homecoming. And we meet the criteria. We actually had more than the last time. And there are so many, we actually had to do a morning and afternoon choir, and some people doubled up, so roughly 500 to 600 people in the morning and afternoon choir. It was like an immense, incredible vibrational bath, homecoming. And probably the biggest acknowledgement was when Cryan said that we were shockingly accurate at recreating what was done before. And then said we turned the key in the lock. So, and what he meant by that is that we had opened up a system of time capsules. that were waiting for time that we as a planet had achieved a vibrational consciousness state, that the time capsules, which were higher information from interdimensional sources, could be tapped. And so he described 12 points of the Earth called nodes, where these time capsules were located. And each node had a corresponding null, which made a type of engine or battery system out of it. So the first event was in Maui, and the node was the Tibetsi Mountains in Chad. Never even heard of the Tibetsi Mountains before, but that was the pair. And then we knew 11 other nodes and nulls, and we only learned how they paired as each new event was done. And so more tones were added based on different directions we got from choir to choir. And now all 12 of those nodes have been activated. So all 12 node and null pairs are functioning, but the whole system isn't integrated as another engine of planetary consciousness shift. And this next choir on 22222, the Aloha choir, the assignment is to go from 2 parts to 4 parts. And 2 parts is described as baby talk because the description is that in these choirs that are, where we use the so-called pineal tones, the pineal glands of all the singers interconnect. And it creates what is described as a group field quantum interdimensional transmitter that communicates quantum information instantaneously across the cosmos for any civilization that is advanced enough to listen.
Wow.
And that the first choir, the song that was still for 26,000 years, our quote unquote sisters in the stars heard that call for the first time in that long. And basically each choir would say, you know, we've made it, we survived, we made it this far. And going from 2 parts to the 4 parts, I believe this is the first time in history this will have been done. And we expect there to be over 1,000 singers when we gather again for this so-called final choir, that it'll be in 4 parts. So it'll be literally baritone, bass, tenor, alto, and soprano, all singing their parts in harmony. That going from 2 to 4 parts, we're going from baby talk to adult talk with the cosmos, both to send and receive information. So if we're talking about, you know, entering quote unquote a galactic civilization,
Mm-hmm.
this would be one of the parts of doing that.
Wow, that's exciting.
Really exciting.
One question
Yeah.
first, Dr. Todd.
Mhm.
Do you have to be singing the tones to get the benefits from it, or can you just hear the tones and receive the benefits from it, or is it a combination?
Just hearing them creates profound benefits. And I believe it's the case that if you sing them yourself, then you're also tuning it directly to your own vibrational instrument, and it can take it to a deeper and more impactful level. But even just hearing them ambiently, I believe is very beneficial. I mean, one of the interesting things is that a person I work with, my main agricultural research colleague from Mexico, whose name is Raul Mendez Segura, with whom we did the agricultural studies, um, giving some of the results that I shared with you for increasing not only yields, but also the actual nutrient density in the food. He also is interested in this so-called Mozart effect. So the effect of playing classical music and how plants grow. And he has what he calls his best of Mozart pieces. And so he's played different types of classical music, and he sees the response of plants. So there's like the bass line, there's various music, and then his gold standard has been these, you know, best of Mozart's for the effect on plants. That's his gold standard. And what was interesting is that when we released the rehearsal recording, so the first 24 levels of the tones that were given to the choristers to learn how to sing them, and people had to choose whether they were in the red choir or the gold choir because they each had 12 to sing, that when he played that to the plants, what he saw was that the effect was, he described, 33% better than the best of Mozart,
Wow.
just playing the songs
Huh.
there was recording for people to rehearse to. And then when we actually did the choir in Maui, and we have the masters, we do actually have a CD of the first choir in Maui, with the morning choir and the afternoon choir, and then the encore choir. When he played that recording, the result was, very interestingly, it basically was 100% more than what he considered, the best of Mozart for the effects that he'd seen. And then even more interestingly, he experimented with changing the ordering. So there's a particular ordering of the tones for the quantum message that we were getting for ourselves as those in the room, but also that we were sending. And then when he experimented with changing the order, the least effective order reduced it to an 80% improvement, but the optimal order increased it to 200% more. So that's just the effect of playing it in the room.
Well, and just like we were talking about early with the importance of language, right? And the
Mhm.
importance of certain tones, and that they carry a certain amount of information. So
Is there a reason as to why Cryon asked or directed you to hold these specific events in specific parts of the world?
Well, the first event, of course, as you know, was the date of the end of the Mayan calendar. So in December 21st, 2012, there's even a movie, 2012, right, where uh, some thought that the end of the calendar meant, the end of the world as we know it. And I think it was a bifurcation point. That's what it's described as, where the path splits. Do we go down the path of whatever, human control and human police states, and down sort of a dwindling path of awareness, or do we go to a path of a higher level kind of civilization of man's humanity to man, and evolving higher states of awareness and supporting our creativity and creating a more enlightened, higher vibrational, more sustainable planet. And I believe that was literally the hinge point in time. So all of us that were aware of it and did whatever ceremonial process we did on that date with awareness, whether it was the Tibetan system or the Vedic system, or what we did recreating the ancient Lemurian system, it was about a conscious decision to move towards the path of an enlightened planet.
What about the location specifically?
The locations, well, it's interesting because they would be what we consider power points of the planet. Uh, and the further description of nodes and nulls, so the whole system, the 24 locations were revealed right after Maui, so we knew what they all were. We just didn't know how they paired, but now they're all paired.
Mm.
And it went from Maui to Cancun, which is basically the Mayan Riviera. So it's the remnants of the Mayan civilization, to Mount Shasta, where some say that the Lemurians that shifted to higher dimensional vibrational states, occupy the mountain. There's all sorts of lore about the Lemurians in the mountain in Mount Shasta. From there, we went to Uluru, the outback of Australia, the most sacred site of the indigenous there. And they say that our civilization sisters from the stars were there at least 60,000 years ago. Something, there still are some that hang out there, but very privately. And then on to, interestingly, there's a place in Arkansas that you wouldn't consider too special, but it is Mount Ida, that has the world's largest underground mountain of quartz. So it's one great big giant crystal resonator. From there to the French Alps and Mont Chamonix, then to Glastonbury, and more recently to the Rila Mountains in Bulgaria. And then some others were activated through a Hawaiian shaman named Kale, who unfortunately moved to join our ancestors in the past year, so that between the choirs and between some that were activated from Calais, who was the shamaness who hosted the first meeting in Maui and traveled a lot with Lee Carroll, that all 12 nodes and nulls have been activated. So it's been a process. And every time we do a choir, we get directed to what is the next step? What is the next step? What's the next assignment for what is to be remembered? So one of my assignments was to remember 2 lullabies that my mother used to sing to me in Lemuria.
Mm. Wow.
And those are really actually quite enchanting to hear. I can share those recordings with you. And the last assignment, and this is something that you may like to share with your listeners, my assignment for the event in Bulgaria, in the Rila Mountains, which was to remember the song that a civilization sings when it goes from duality consciousness to unity consciousness, called the Victory Song. And it's actually a lengthy piece. It's about 7 minutes long altogether, and it kind of builds and grows and is a whole vibrational story that has a big crescendo fun finish. And the concept is that by singing or even listening to the Victory Song now, it's like collapsing time. It's collapsing the time between now and having a fully enlightened civilization, where unity consciousness reigns as opposed to duality.
We have that recording, so we will find a way to share that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting, you were describing it as time capsules, and by how you were offering the description for that, I think Huna Flash was referring to it as stargates. I think they were describing the same thing.
And he's actually been going to many
Various
different
parts.
places in the world. I think he had a list of them that he was doing, and he had been traveling all over basically to activate these stargates. And it sounds like different ways, almost a similar kind of a mission in some ways.
And next month, his mission is to go to Peru and activate a portal there. So really fascinating, really fascinating.
Right, but one of the nodes is Machu Picchu.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
so he'll be
That's
at
where
Machu
he's
Picchu
going.
doing that. And yeah, it's really fascinating. I think it's really exciting too. I mean, it's pretty amazing work that you guys are doing with all of that. And we'll be there on next year for sure. We're going to be a part of that one. We'll figure out how to go there. The girls in their unicorn dresses and everything.
That would be so great. And what's actually kind of cool, we originally had scheduled the Aloha Choir for 10/10/2020, which is also kind of a cool residence set of dates, the numbers of them anyway. And because of this whole Corona COVID-19 thing, and the resort not allowing us to have more than like 25% occupancy in the room, that we decided to pick the new date. And October is not the best time of year to be in Maui because the whales aren't there yet. It's not whale season. They don't really come until about December. But when we have revised it now to 2/22, your birthday, I want to make fun of you, so that it could be sort of a secret. It's
50-50 guess.
that it's like in the heart of whale season. So you can actually go in the water and either with or without a snorkel, like dive down. And where we're going to be in Ka'anapali, the ocean floor is like a parabolic mirror, and you can literally hear a symphony of whales singing at that time.
Wow.
It's quite amazing.
Really interesting, because I think it was actually in Cryon's material where I read about him speaking of whales and dolphins, and how they have actually kept the wisdom or the knowledge of the earth within them.
The
So
biological record keepers of the planet, correct.
Ah, interesting. Because now that you mention that, Huna Flash also has 2 tattoos on him that I was going to ask him about, because he
It's
has a dolphin and a whale
Mhm.
tattooed on him. So that's so interesting.
And it's funny too, because it's like even our 4-year-old, she's been
Fascinated.
absolutely fascinated by dolphins and whales. And we live on Vancouver Island, so that's a possibility.
yeah.
We can go out and see them at certain, and we haven't taken them yet, but I think maybe in the summer when we are able to, then we'd like to take them out to do that. But yeah, it's just kind of neat, what even from an early age, what seems to resonate for whatever reason, right?
Well, what's interesting is that there are 2 of the pineal tones in this first set of 24, because there have been more new tones since, but the first 24 is literally the recreation of the ancient ceremony, the ancient choir. That level 15 are the tones based on the song of the whales, and 17 the song of the dolphins, and the 2 are paired together.
Huh.
Of course.
Another point that you're making. So you're speaking of 24, and Huna Flash has also mentioned that within our density and the Earth's density, we have the capacity to reach 24 dimensions. And I've heard, we just spoke with Elizabeth April, another person we've interviewed here, and she said 12, and I've heard the number 12 and 13 regularly, but it's interesting how both of you are saying 24.
Right. And if you get into superstrings theory, it's 26, but it's described as 24 plus 2.
I think it's incredibly fascinating. And Dr. Todd, I want to be cognizant of time because I know you have another interview coming up in just a bit here. Where can people learn about the work that you're doing? Where can they learn about the pineal tones? I know on the site you've got CDs and all that kind of stuff, so people can actually experience it. But where's the best place to send stuff, to send people to learn more about your work?
Well,
you got a couple different spots.
If it's about the pineal tones, the best site is pinealtones.com. And there's one site that's pretty cool. I work with a documentarian who actually is the person who created Third Eye Spies, Lance Mangia, and that's been a very popular offering, I believe, on Netflix, with like 70 million hours of views. It's pretty cool. And he did a documentary on the third event we did in Mount Shasta. So there's actually a full video production. It's like a meditative piece where the choir images as they sing is interspersed with different images of temples and sacred geometry and so forth. And it's got a clever name. It's called Rosetta Tones. So instead of the Rosetta Stone, it's the rosettatones.com. So to see some video footage, that's a nice place to go.
Okay, we'll make a note of that for sure.
And then I have a personal site which talks a little bit about everything, which is the stem cells, the agriculture, the creating new crystalline forms of therapeutic compounds, pineal tones, a bit of everything. It's drtoddo.com. So if you can't find things elsewhere, then one can go there. And then the nutritional supplements, where we photoacoustically enhance the vibrational patterns of the molecules, which really enhances nutritional effects, but it's also about awakening the DNA. That's at gematria.com.
Yeah, I actually just checked out gematria.com and contacted them, and I'm going to connect with them as far as bringing their products in, because I thought it was fascinating. And that's a whole nother interview, I think, to be able to talk about all that. Because I mean, you like I said, you really blend these worlds magically. And even as far as all of the, because it's not really straight physical based, but all of the stuff that you talk about with anti-aging, I'd love to set up something down the road here where we can talk specifically about those parts too, because that's all very fascinating as well. But yeah, check out that. And you've got your book, Growing Younger, which is, go to Dr. Todd's website. It's a free download. I'll link it on the show notes so that people know how to go there. But I mean, you offer that book is a free download as an ebook, so people can read it, and you break down really all of the main physical stuff with the studies as far as what you can do. And then the supplement company that you work with, or that you've created, has all of the specific supplements that, from how I understand it, they are treated with the laser to increase their bioavailability and whatnot, right?
That is correct.
Yeah,
That's
which I haven't
right.
seen. That's the only company I've ever heard of that does that. So,
And one thing that's interesting, just for understanding, the waveform that we have engineered, basically, and is that the core optical technology converts the laser waves from waves in phase to waves exactly out of phase. So instead of getting an amplified wave, we basically cancel out all the vectors. We create a vector sum 0, which then creates the equivalent of waves that are in phase, that are conjugated. They're in phase, but they're going in opposite directions. And the wave going this way, even according to conventional physics, is going forward in space, but also forward in time. And that wave is going backwards, not just in space, but also backwards in time. And then, so it's a creation of time reverse light, but also time going forward and backward. The same rate is in a sense timeless light. And then from another perspective, the waves are not only sine waves, but they also go through polarization cycles. So a light wave coming towards you is coming towards you in a spiral. So we've created a spiral, counter spiral of light, which is the same geometric structure as DNA.
which makes sense when so much of what the work that you did from that perspective is all on anti-aging. And I think you talked about, I mean, one of the main ones there was the formula Methuselah life,
Right.
which we'll have to do, like I said, we'll have to do a whole thing where we break that down for people, because there's lots to it. But I mean, you were talking about even the potential of living to be like 1,000 years old.
Oh yeah, like we used to.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think that a lot of times we hear that and people go, well, they got the calendar wrong and this. And I just think it was just a different way of doing things, you know?
I thought the same until our latest discovery about a special type of stem cell that we can now awaken, which stays at a newborn state for our lives until we awaken it. So even a person who's 100 years old, we can awaken newborn cells and start to regenerate their system with it. So food for another discussion. We can go into greater detail.
Absolutely.
And once this episode airs, we will actually be inviting Dr. Todd back for a live Q&A. So that's been scheduled. So we will post a time and date for that for your audience and our audience, so that people can come and actually offer their questions, and we'll do our best to address all of them, to bring them to Dr. Todd and address all of them within that time that we have with him.
Excellent. And actually, we do have a landing page for this podcast, where I believe we'll be providing the download of the victory song. People actually would like to have that.
Great, perfect.
Our gift for listening, which is simply pinealtones.com/events/inspire.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everybody, I mean, if you haven't checked it out yet, absolutely go and look at it. We are going to start having that music playing all the time here, and we'll have like that with the girls, bring our kids in with all of this stuff. So it's kind of fun, but
thank you so much.
Amazing. That was mind-blowing,
really
Dr. Todd. So much fun.
My great pleasure and honor.
Thank
That
you.
was a pleasure.
Thanks for your work as well, getting this to the world.
Oh, you know, it's an absolute pleasure. It's so much fun for us to be able to have these conversations with everybody, and
I think how it works too, it's almost like it starts to light us up. As the information starts to come in, people don't even know that information such as this was out there. So as they stumble to come across this sort of information, it starts to awaken them in different ways, in the same way that it has spoken so deeply to us in this past couple of years. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Oh,
yeah,
great pleasure.
Wonderful. And we'll talk to you soon. Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Very good.
Bye,
Dr. Todd.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, Reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.